Brooke Taylor, who is reporting live from where we will get this breaking news in Jena, Louisiana. Those proceedings underway. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Martha. Yeah, that hearing's been going on for about an hour right now, and it's pretty much a waiting game because there's no cameras or phones. We have another reporter who's been outside that ICE detention facility and said it's really chaos going inside that courtroom because over a dozen of his supporters showed up. They said they were there till 6 a.m. just demanding to get inside. Mahmoud Khalil has been held at this ICE detention facility here in Jena, Louisiana for about more than a month since he was arrested in New York City. The government arguing that Mahmoud Khalil should be deported under an immigration law that allows the Secretary of State to deport aliens considered a threat to U.S. foreign policy. Now, the Department of Homeland Security had to submit evidence proving this. In a two-page memo, Rubio argued that feds can deport Khalil for, quote, participating in anti-Semitic protests and disruptive activities, which fosters a hostile environment for Jewish students in the United States. Well, Khalil's attorneys, they claim this violates his freedom of speech.
Well, we try to establish that people like Mahmoud have a constitutional right to speak out in this country, and they should not be, the government should not be using this really bogus statute saying it's against U.S. foreign policy interests.
And the State Department has revoked over 300 student visas so far. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that student visas are a privilege. If you come into this country as a student, the government expects you to go to class and study, not vandalize campuses across the country. His supporters, Martha, they plan to hold a press conference around 3:30 Eastern time. Of course, that could change depending on when this hearing ends, but we're by our phones right now, just waiting for that update.
Okay, Brooke, we know you'll get it to us as soon as it comes through. With that, we bring in Jonathan Turley, constitutional attorney and Fox News contributor. Jonathan, always good to have you here. Now, the administration has made some sort of varying arguments on their reasoning to deport Khalil. What is your take on how the judge may be approaching this at this hour?
Well, the administration has not made it easy for this judge. I'm surprised by that two-page letter because there is a concrete basis to deport Khalil if you simply establish what was originally alleged, that he participated in a protest that involved property damage and trespass and other criminal acts. That's conduct. That doesn't go to the content of his speech, and they can clearly remove him for that. The letter instead focuses more on his views, and that's putting it in a very difficult light for this judge and balancing what are legitimate free speech concerns against the power of the administration. Now, where his counsel, I think, is going to have a hard time is, as you just heard, they said, we don't think this statute should be used. Well, the statute is going to be used, and this immigration judge is not going to say it can't be used. And that statute gives Secretary Rubio sweeping authority. And it's not clear how much a judge, let alone an immigration judge, can question the judgment of the Secretary of State underneath that statute once he's issued this type of declaration.
Yeah, you know, another thing that I was looking at today is the green card holder rights, because it's interesting that this ends up in the immigration court, because the State Department has made the argument that they can remove him for conduct, as you just pointed out. Now, he's a green card holder. And he is here sort of, you know, at the permission of the United States government. But is anti-Semitism, promoting anti-Semitism on campus and essentially preventing Jewish students from their right to go to class, is that hate crime? And can hate crime be the issue here that could have him removed for his green card?
Well, that's an excellent question. And as you can tell in that language, there's a lot of subjectivity, which is what his counsel has said that should concern the court. And the letter says that this could be otherwise lawful conduct, but the secretary can still have you deported for it. I'm surprised by that framing because it makes me think that they're using this case to go for the three-point shot, that they want to use this case to establish strong precedent in other cases that will be based on not as developed records. So we'll have to see how this judge reacts to all of this. They did not produce the type of evidence that some of us were expecting, some concrete ties of what Khalil knew about and directed the protest itself, that after all resulted in citations, after all were unlawful. That seems the clearest and easiest basis. I think the administration wants to establish a broader principle here to say, you might not like this law, but it gives Secretary Rubio sweeping authority, and we just used it.
Yeah. So it sounds as if you're making the argument that the administration attorneys are almost overcharging and that they're shooting it for too much of an umbrella prosecution in a sense here, and that they would have been smarter. Well, we'll see what the judge decides, right? But just looking at it from as we wait for this to go much more pinpointly at conduct, anti-Semitism, potentially a hate crime to prevent Jewish students from feeling safe on the campus might have been a cleaner way to pursue this.
Right. They also have statements that they say were omitted or facts omitted from his original application. I tell my students in litigation all the time, the old adage, aim small, miss small. And this ain't that. I mean, that letter is basically saying we can deport people for otherwise lawful conduct if the secretary believes it is harmful or threatening to our national security. That's the whole Megillah, and they want to establish it. Maybe they view this as their strongest case to do so.
Maybe. We will see what the judge says, and it will set some sort of precedent here because they have a number of other students who they have also in the same position that they're hoping to remove based on basically violating their right to be in the country on a student visa or even in a green card on this case. Jonathan, thank you. Always great to see you.
Thank you,
We'll get you back if we get this decision.
Let's bring in Carrie Urban now, Fox News legal editor. Tell us what we need to know about this right now, Carrie.
Well, I disagree with Khalil's lawyer when he says there was nothing in the memo to support his removal. That's just not true. If you read the memo, and anybody can pull it up online and read this for themselves, they say the basis for removal is that Khalil was involved in anti-Semitic activity, disruptive protests, and citations for unlawful actions during those protests. And, you know, we have to go back to the basics here. The law gives Secretary Rubio very broad discretion in terms of when and how he can remove an alien. And all it requires is for that alien's presence or activities to be adverse to foreign policy. Well, first and foremost, Mr. Khalil is an alien. Yes, he has more of a protected status than the average non-citizen as a lawful permanent resident, but that's still not a citizen. Citizenship is a gift. It's not a right. So that satisfies that prong. Then his presence and activities. Well, we know that Khalil drove the efforts that involved intimidating Jewish students on Columbia University's campus. They took over a building, and as part of, quote, negotiating with the administration to, release the building and to stop, their activity, they were pressuring them to cut ties with Israeli businesses and their partnership with Tel Aviv University. Well, Donald Trump's priority is to crack down on anti-Semitic activity, and if our number one ally is Israel in the Middle East, I don't see how Secretary Rubio, in this instance, doesn't have discretion to remove Mr. Khalil under the law. And so I guess we'll see what happens today. And as Brooke just mentioned, the hearing just began.
Yeah, and Carrie, I'm curious as to how they proceed, because you're talking about Mahmoud Khalil being the first student detained. If this judge rules against the administration, do they stop? Do they put a freeze on detaining any more students, or do they go forward with the appeals process knowing that maybe a different judge comes out with a different outcome?
Well, that's exactly why this hearing is so important, because it's going to set the tone for these other student visa cases that we're seeing. And as we know, some of these students who had their visas revoked for similar reasons as to why Mr. Khalil is before the immigration judge today, they've already begun self-deporting. So President Trump and Secretary Rubio's actions have already had an effect here as far as people taking action and just removing themselves, in the first place. But to your point, Trace, yes, I think whatever happens here is really going to dictate what happens with everyone else.
Yeah, Carrie, two pieces of critical sound here. This is Ellie Kananim on America's Newsroom earlier today. She's the former State Department Deputy Special Envoy and the former chair, obviously, to combat anti-Semitism, the chair of the department, I should say. She also went to Columbia, and she said this.
Columbia University, which I'm ashamed to call my alma mater, has had extensive amount of time to clean up their act, to make sure that Jewish students are protected from anti-Semitic incidents. What we're seeing is that Columbia University are not behaving like good faith actors, and the Trump administration is taking every right action to, in fact, protect Jewish students from assault that they've been under at Columbia.
And Secretary Rubio put it this way when the president went around the table in that cabinet meeting yesterday. Listen.
No one's entitled to a student visa. The press covers student visas like there's some sort of birthright. No, a student visa is like me inviting you into my home. If you come into my home and put all kinds of crap on my couch, I'm going to kick you out of my house. And so, that's what we're doing with our country, thanks to the president.
Here's your thoughts on that, Carrie.
Yeah, it's a privilege, not a right. It's really that simple. And we have to remember something else. This isn't just isolated to New York City. We have to remember, and even going back in time, if you recall, around October 7th and what happened afterwards, Jewish students were literally afraid to go to class. They were being intimidated. They couldn't go. They were staying home. They were afraid for their safety. That's ridiculous. This is the United States. And I think one of the most compelling and troubling things that I remember from that time is that Hamas and Hamas-affiliated groups were watching closely what was happening on universities in America at the time, specifically Columbia. How do we know that? They were putting out statements of support for what Mr. Khalil and other student leaders were doing. How is that not adverse to our foreign policy interests? It is, because other adverse nations are looking at the United States and they're saying, wow, this is interesting. The United States is letting this happen on their watch. They're feeling pretty good about this. And how does that make our #1 ally in the Middle East feel? Israel. Probably not so great. So I think Secretary Rubio has a lot of bandwidth here to remove Mr. Khalil and other people who are involved in similar activities.
I'd like to get your take, Carrie, if I can, on the other big case. We're talking about the Abrego Garcia case, the Maryland man, illegal immigrant who was sent to El Salvador. So basically the judge is saying, or the government is saying, listen, if this person is told they bring him back, they don't want him brought back immediately. They want to know the process of how you're going to bring him back. Is that right?
Yeah, this is a bit of a messy situation. The Supreme Court last night issued an order, and they said, look, this individual deserves some kind of process. He has to come back to the United States to face this kind of process before he's deported to El Salvador or removed where he already is. But here's the catch. They're telling the lower court judge, what do you mean by effectuate? It's one thing for the United States to, have this removal proceeding, and they're saying they should have. This man was entitled to some kind of due process, and that did not happen. However, you as a district court judge also don't have this absolute authority to tell the, the government exactly how and when to do this. So it's a little bit confusing. So that hearing just ended. The lower court judge said the government now has to give them an update, give this judge an update every day, I guess, until this person is returned. But, look, this is a separation of powers issue again, but I think a lot of these immigration cases are coming down to something pretty simple, which is due process. And the Supreme Court this week pretty consistently is saying that whether these people are accused gang members, whether they're here illegally, they do deserve some kind of process before they are removed, because that is what we do here in the United States.
Carrie, thanks for coming on with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The decision that we have been waiting for, a judge has just ruled that the Trump administration's effort to deport Mahmoud Khalil can move forward. Correspondent Brooke Taylor, live right near that courthouse in Jena, Louisiana. Tell us what the judge is saying in there, Brooke.
Hi, Martha. Yeah, this has been long anticipated and some major news. Just to first give you some perspective, we're down the street from that ICE detention center. The courtroom is inside of there. They didn't allow any phones or cameras. So we're finding out this information from our reporter who's over there down the street. She tells us, as you just mentioned, the immigration judge has found Mahmoud Khalil removable. Khalil's attorneys have until April 23rd to file relief applications. I asked that reporter what the immigration judge was able to say. She cited those DHS papers and said that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was able to meet that burden. And again, they have decided that Mahmoud Khalil is removable. The next question, Martha, of course, his attorneys are going to fight this, but how long that process is going to take right now for him to be deported. We'll send it back to you.
All right. Breaking news. Brooke, thank you very much. And with that, we bring in Outkick founder Clay Travis, who's also an attorney. and understands this case well, has talked about it quite a bit. So he can be removed. His lawyers can appeal this decision until April 23rd. Your thoughts?
Trump keeps winning. Look, we wondered how the Resistance 2.0 would come to be. Much of the legacy media has collapsed. Even the Democrat Party doesn't seem to have an aggressive opposition to Trump. It's been the federal district court levels where people have really come after him. But Trump has been winning as those appeals have reached the Supreme Court. This is a big win in the short term for Trump. And I think it just kind of goes to demonstrate that the judicial system has decided to throw itself athwart the tracks of the Trump train, so to speak, to try to keep him from advancing. And really, much of this is about delay, right? There's this idea, and I think it's real, that next year we've got the midterm elections, the House is up for grabs, and they're trying to do whatever they can to slow the progress of Trump. But so far, when he gets it up to the appellate level, most of the actions of the Trump administration are being found legal. And unlike Joe Biden, who it felt like every time he went to the Supreme Court was getting struck down, Trump is winning a lot.
Yeah, we know Marco Rubio essentially said that in the end, they went with a couple different arguments, but in the end, they arrived at you don't have a right to be in this country. It's a privilege to come here and study. This young man is a green card holder, but this immigration judge is buying the argument that he violated the terms of the green card by participating in anti-Semitic protests. Anti-Semitism is against the rules of this country.
Yeah, just up the road, right, at Columbia, where they completely shut down the university. But this happened all over the country, and it's not just about him. It's about sending the message to students who are on campus, hey, you're not going to be able to shut down. Remember UCLA, they wouldn't let Jewish kids walk through the campus.
That's right.
I mean, this was crazy.
I think they're denying their ability to go to class, which is discrimination, a form of discrimination, and potentially a hate crime to stand in the way, because the university sent them home. It's not safe for you to be here. So they created an unsafe environment on the campus.
Just think what would happen if the KKK showed up on any of these campuses and didn't let black kids go to and from the classrooms. The federal government would show up and they would say this is unacceptable. Jewish kids, like everybody else, have the right to get an education.
Yeah, and their argument was free speech. But if your free speech right is stepping on someone else's right to, they paid for their education to walk into a building and go to a classroom, then you're impeding their ability to do that.
You don't have the freedom to break the law to speak, right? There are speech parameters that everybody understands. And I think the message that's being sent here is an important one.
Yeah. So, Clay, we're going to see you in the morning.
Yes, I'll be bright and early in this studio.
Fox and Friends.
That's right. I'm looking forward to it. Never done it.
Yeah, it's
you have
early.
Some tips
the alarm
for me?
clock goes off early.
You have tips. You've done it a lot, so I'm excited to do it.
I'm going to set my alarm. We'll get up and watch. It's going to be a lot of fun.
No, you're not. You're going to be sleeping in. Masters is going on. Start your morning with us right here.
Clay, enjoy your New York City time.
I will. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Live from Texas, this is The Will Cain Show. Just in the last 5 minutes, a Louisiana judge determined that the Trump administration provided enough evidence to deport anti-Israel activist and Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil. Khalil's team now has until April 23rd to respond, but this is a big deal. The judge finding Mahmoud Khalil removable. The White House defended his removal, with the standard being that his beliefs, statements, and associations compromise U.S. foreign policy interests. Now let's break down the history. In December 22, Khalil entered the country on a student visa to pursue a master's degree at Columbia. The next year, following the October 7th attack on Israel, he became involved in activism, serving as a spokesperson for the university's Apartheid Divest group. That's the same organization that staged mass protests causing chaos on campus and students and with faculty. Fast forward to 2024. Khalil obtained his green card while completing his graduate studies. Then, last month, DHS agents arrested Khalil, moved him to a detention center in Louisiana, and sought to deport him. That's when a federal judge stepped in and blocked his deportation for that time being. That brings us to today. Mahmoud Khalil ruled removable. Joining me now is the author of the new book entitled On Democracies and Death Cults. It's Douglas Murray. Douglas, great to see you.
Great to be with you, Will.
This case has been a fascinating one that has ignited some debate. The debate sort of precedes what just happened in this court. It is whether or not someone in the United States, a permanent resident, can be availed with the full rights of the First Amendment, or whether or not the Constitution of the United States is in essence a suicide pact towards views that would undermine not just Western civilization, but the United States. On the other hand, it appears that the Secretary of State met the burden required, that in order to have this visa revoked, it was proved he was a threat to U.S. foreign policy. Your thoughts?
I think this has been an extraordinary case, Will, and if I can say so, at the outset, I always like to say when the issue of Mahmoud Khalil comes up, that he has become such a free speech hero for sections of the left and the right in America. But I always say, whenever they try to make him some kind of martyr, remember the name Edan Alexander. He is a 21-year-old who was born in New Jersey and is still, after 18 months, being held by the terrorist group Hamas in Gaza. If the people who had campaigned for Khalil's release or freedom had spent the last 18 months calling for the freedom of the actual kidnapped victim, the person who has actually been denied all of his rights and much more, Edan Alexander, then I'd be interested to hear these people's thoughts on Khalil. But they didn't. They have spent the last 18 months not just excusing the massacre, but in the case of Khalil and his group at Columbia University, actually praising the massacre. Let me just read, if I may, very quickly, two statements that every American should know about. The first is that the group, Columbia University Apartheid Divest, called October the 7th, the massacre that I write about in my book, quote, a moral, military, and political victory. Now, one of the other things that everyone should know about this group is that one of the things they call for, in their own words, is, quote, they say they are, quote, fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization. I'll read that again because it's so unbelievable. They are fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization. Now, I suggest that Marco Rubio, Secretary Rubio, was completely right when he said some weeks ago, what country would invite people into the country and allow them all the advantages of the country if the person in question uses their time in the country to destroy the country? Not just by, as in the case of Khalil and his group, intimidating Jewish students and threatening Jewish students and hounding them across their places of study, but by abusing the staff at the university, by physically harming people who worked there as janitors, by shutting down public buildings, by shutting down public highways, by many other things. What country in its sane mind would allow people in to do that? If I went and moved to Paris on a student visa, I think one of the things I would not do whilst there would be to try to overthrow the French state. Because if I did, I'd guess that I could get into trouble. This is not about the First Amendment's rights of an American citizen. This is about somebody coming to America who used his time in America to campaign and wage war against America.
And it's clear that the judge, the immigration judge, found that argument, and perhaps even those words that you read as submitted, we don't know the exact evidence, but perhaps as submitted by the Secretary of State, compelling to revoke a non-citizen's ability to stay in the United States and make those arguments against our foreign policy. Douglas, it feels like I've been spending hours with you recently, although we have just talked now for the first time in months. I've been listening to you in your debate with Dave Smith on the Joe Rogan Experience. I've been listening to this debate that is not untied to the conversation you and I have now, which is about when this sentiment that is very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause began to take over young people, in particular young people here in the United States. For the audience, here's a little bit of the debate you've been having with Dave Smith.
Leveled by now.
Yeah.
But it did not go in to level the place like that. No.
Okay, they went in and leveled the place, but that wasn't their intention?
Let's just, I think, a part of a generation that's coming up has been told there is something especially wicked about Israel, and I think that people have been indoctrinated by very bad actors into this, and as a result have excused atrocities or will make excuses for them, make excuses for the people who do them. I think, in addition, it plays to some of the darkest things of the regional mind as well as the international mind.
For anyone interested in the longer 3-hour debate that covers ground from Ukraine to Israel, they can go check out the Joe Rogan Experience. Douglas, that particular portion of the debate, you were talking about the point of view among young people, not exclusively, but primarily, that is very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Dave would argue, and did argue to you, that the last 18 months of civilian death in Gaza is a reason for that sympathy. It seems there that what you allude to is the reason is much darker, and I understand you to mean anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. I think that it's extremely important for people to realize that, of course, it's not the case that any criticism of the Israeli government or Israel's actions is anti-Semitic. Of course not. But if you spend no time in recent years on the streets protesting against the mass slaughter going on in Syria, if you didn't come out one Saturday to protest against the actual genocide that is going on in Sudan, if you didn't ever come out on the streets to protest about the hundreds of thousands of people killed in Yemen, and then you decide, in the wake of the October the 7th massacre, day after day after day, whether it's a protester at Columbia or a so-called comedian like Dave Smith, to go on and lie and defame Israel, and two, in the case of many of these protesters, to praise Hamas, to actually exalt the massacre of Jews, then yes, obviously, it's anti-Semitism. And, you know, the question I really ask in this book, Will, is, first of all, I wanted to see the ramifications of the October the 7th massacre with my own eyes, which is why I got to Israel as soon as I could after the massacre, to see the victims, to speak with the families, to speak with survivors, to meet with them in hospitals, to go to the morgues, to see the effects of what Hamas did that day. That was the first reason. And the second reason was that I wanted to see Israel's response with my own eyes. And that was why for the last year and a half, I've spent most of my time in Israel and Gaza and Lebanon. The third thing, though, which is what I really want people to think about, what I want my readers to think about, is why is it that when a democracy and an ally of ours like Israel was attacked so barbarously by people who worship death, who glorify in death, who seek death, not just others' death, but their own, why in a fight between a democracy and a death cult do we have so many people in America, particularly young people, who have chosen to side with the death cult?
You know, I spent those 3 hours, I've not yet gotten to read on democracies and death cults, which I intend to do, but I spent those 3 hours thinking that both of you made, at times, very valid points. I think one of the most compelling pieces of evidence to support what you just laid out for us that you made during that debate, Douglas, is that these celebrations, they were celebrations, and also protests, began on October 8th. And that is the most compelling evidence as to what they are in response to, or what their message was, at least in that day, in that moment. Douglas Murray, check out On Democracies and Death Cults. Thank you so much, Douglas.
Great pleasure to be with you.
President of the Article 3 Project, former clerk for Justice Gorsuch. Mike, now this is not a federal judge. Immigration judges are separate from the federal court system. And his lawyers late today said, it's not the end of the road. We're going to file in federal court in New Jersey. Well, how do you think this is going to go on the federal level after this immigration judge ruled as she did today?
Well, President Trump campaigned on the fact he's going to secure our border and he's going to deport illegal immigrants, particularly those who support Hamas. And that's exactly what President Trump is doing here. Not only does he have that power, that duty under our immigration statutes that have been on the books for 70+ years, he also has that duty as commander-in-chief to make sure we do not have these dangerous individuals in our country.
Well, ACLU's executive director today, before this ruling came out, said this is a clear attack on the First Amendment. Mr. Khalil is a permanent resident. He's not an illegal immigrant. He's married to an American citizen, is about to have a baby. And this clearly is just punishing speech that is unpopular. Your response to that?
Well, you can actually denaturalize American citizens who are naturalized if they are Hamas supporters up to 10 years after they were naturalized. So if you can do that to naturalized citizens, you can certainly get rid of these residents.
Now, Mike, the White House published a report yesterday about the benefits that illegals who were on the terror watch list received under the Biden administration, and it's staggering. The list includes 902 of them that collected Medicaid, 41 of them collected unemployment insurance, 22 received federal student loans, oh my gosh, and 409 received tax refunds. Democrats, of course, don't seem to care about this issue at all. But I imagine the American voters are going to be interested to learn more about how people on terror lists end up getting federal benefits.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? If you're a flood victim in America, the Biden administration left you with nothing. But if you are on a terror watch list, you're getting these federal benefits. How is this not harboring illegal aliens, which is a federal crime?
Mike, there was an immigration setback for Trump yesterday with that Obama-appointed federal judge who blocked the administration from expediting the deportation of about 500,000 people who Biden had paroled into the country, like 500,000, like Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians. And Trump's like, no, we're gonna cut that short. And a judge said, you don't have the authority to do that? Mike, on what grounds does the president not have that authority?
It's a very good question, because President Biden illegally mass paroled these several 100,000 illegal immigrants, and President Trump is just reversing that illegal acts by President Biden. And you have this activist judge trying to stop the president. The president has the statutory and constitutional power and duty to make sure that our border is secure and people who do not belong here are not in our country.
All right, Mike, thank you very much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.